And then, in the late 1990s, as the Cold War ended, he turned to international trade consulting for the United Nations, World Bank, USAID, and other donor agencies, guiding more than 50 countries as they joined the newly formed World Trade Organization and its agreements. A way Steve was convinced would help integrate the former USSR countries and emerging countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East into the world economy and promote a more peaceful and prosperous world. It was this work that led him to his two momentous and turbulent years in Mother Russia from 2004 to 2006, which he will tell you all about tonight. I'm very pleased to introduce our Torch Club friend, Stephen Creskoff.
Thank you, Kathleen Owen, and thank you, Memory. Now you can hear this, hopefully, and I'll try and return it to you afterward. Otherwise,
It'll go off to Tucson.
it'll go to Tucson. Well, it's my pleasure to be able to talk to you tonight about a very interesting experience I had when I was teaching at Johns Hopkins. One of the things I taught was international business negotiations, and part of that course involved cultural differences, which are very important in the international context, as I'm sure you appreciate. So that sort of prepared me for this assignment in Moscow. Let me see if I can work the technology now.
Steve, lift with my.
Did I do something, Jim? I turned it off. Okay, I'm going to do this. Yes.
There.
Here I am in Moscow, September 2004. I've never been to Russia before. I did speak some Russian.
Please hold the mic.
Mic up.
Hold the mic up.
Hey, better.
Remind me again, probably if I fall asleep on certainly unique, and Kathleen and I were investigating this the other day, and we could not trace, maybe one of you might have an idea about it, we could not trace this architecture to some source in the Middle East or the Far East. So I think the tulip domes and the colorful striping and so forth are uniquely identifying Russia. Here's Lenin's tomb, still an icon even today. And let me tell you a little bit about the project that I was working on. So I was the head of at least the consultant group that was sent to Russia to help the Russian Federation join the World Trade Organization and also a World Customs Organization convention that related primarily to customs procedures. So we were working with Russian customs and we had experts from the World Customs Organization, which is an organization that's based in Brussels. Private contractors, so Bearing Point was the prime contractor and I was the project director. And I supervised international experts. And then we had subcontractors that I supervised, a group called Crown Agents from the United Kingdom and ILTS from Russia. So the objective of this was to get Russia into the World Trade Organization and also into this World Customs Organization convention. Well, the first meeting that we had, on one side the Russians and the other side our group with the World Bank representative and with me, did not go too well because the Russian team leader, a woman by the name of Blandina, which in Russian means bland actually, was anything but bland. shouted and she screamed and she said, you know, I have no interest in the World Trade Organization or Russia joining the World Trade Organization. And this sort of set us back a little bit since we were there specifically to help them join the World Trade Organization. Here's some of our project team. I discovered about a month later, watching a Russian movie called Ivan the Terrible, which was actually a comedy made in the 1970s, that in Russia, if you want people to know that you're a czar, you have to threaten them always with execution. So thinking about cultural differences, the light went on. I said, oh, okay, I understand what she's doing. She wants to tell, in that meeting, she was telling me she's the boss, you know, and I'm subject to execution unless I do what she wants. So it was challenging dealing with some of the cultural differences. Here you see my secretary Svetlana, who just graduated from Moscow University and was primarily interested in finding a husband. So she constantly complained to me about, you know, I didn't find anybody at university, so where can I find somebody? And I said, that's your problem. And Tanya was our Russian lawyer, and Igor was on the project too, and then Patricia Macaulay was my colleague, actually, who had been a senior official at the World Customs Organization in Brussels and formerly been with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So here it is, you know, threatening you with execution. You won't know who's a czar unless they scream at you. The other thing that struck me was I wanted to have a map of Russia over my desk, my office desk. At that time, we had the map store around Farragut Square, so I thought, well, we'll get in a car, we'll go buy a map, and Sveta said, no, that's ridiculous, we don't do that here, you order it online. So this is 2004, I was not used to ordering things online, but sure enough, in about a week, this map came that we had ordered, and I, of course, being an American, climbed up on my desk to put it on the wall, and she threw a fit. She said, you can't do that. We don't do that here. We have someone to do that. So it turned out another important cultural difference is that everyone sort of slotted into a particular occupational slot in Russia, and personal initiative is kind of squelched in the sense that you don't reach out into, you know, if you're a mechanical engineer, you don't try and do something other than that. Another cultural difference is, you know, there's still a carryover from the Tsarist times. My wife at the time and I were in St. Petersburg at a cemetery at the end of, I guess, winter, so this would have been in March of 2005. And a derelict came up to him and he got down on one knee and he said in Russian, Princess, can you give me money for vodka? So, you know, Princess, can you give me money? He knew that I wouldn't give him any money. There was still this carryover from Tsarist times, and when I talked to the Russian project head, who obviously had been former KGB because his English was perfect and he read the New York Times every day, he said, we could never eliminate the slave mentality. He regretted that. Alcoholic beverages. This is a big problem in Russia. People are drunks, particularly the men. The average life expectancy for a man is probably about 67, something like that, you know, because of alcoholism. And in a way, you sort of understand it. Actually, one thing that occurred to me, because I had worked in other northern countries like Sweden, was light deprivation. So I brought with me a full spectrum light that I put on my desk, because light deprivation can be, can lead to depression and alcoholism and so forth. And I think that's probably the genesis of that in many of these northern countries. Another example of this difference was when I was having dinner with my French colleague from the World Bank, and he of course ordered a bottle of wine, and I didn't. He kind of looked at me and said, "What sort of barbarian are you not having wine to drink with dinner?" So it's interesting to see these cultural differences. My first home in Moscow was at Tverskaya Marriott, which was a lot of fun because it was also the site of U.S. families adopting Russian children, which was happening at the time. So the last stop for the adoptive children was the 4th floor of this hotel where they would meet their new parents, and it was a wonderful thing to see. Putin put a stop to that, of course. But I got kicked out of the Marriott because they raised their rates and the project couldn't afford me staying there. So I asked our Russian colleagues, and they said, "Well, why don't you stay on the Alexander Block, which is a boat in the Moscow River." This is sometime in September. And it was really a terrible place. It was a floating casino. So I got out of there as quickly as I could and actually found an American. There were a lot of Americans in Moscow at the time that were trying to start businesses, and this guy had a very clever business of going to Russians who had prime apartment locations in the center of the city and saying, "Look, you give me your apartment for 5 years, I will completely renovate it, put all new equipment in and so forth, and then I'll give it back to you in 5 years with all the new furnishings and appliances." And he would then turn around and rent it out on a daily basis. So I ended up with a 1-bedroom apartment with a washer, dryer, and so forth, and it was a much better arrangement for me for a longer stay. These apartments are really small, though, so people tend to live out on the street, and this is an example of that. Somebody who is out on the street, maybe doing some an amateur painting, and because the apartment is crowded, a lot of people in it, very small. The Russian babushkas, you're probably familiar with. At my apartment complex, there was a woman who always sat at the desk in the entryway, and we would have discussions about how superior Russia was to America, in her view. So I've tried to be politic about it, but it was another interesting aspect of the culture. Moscow traffic is awful, and I'm sure it still is. Individualism seems to be expressed in flowing traffic, if nowhere else. So it was usually faster to walk, or the metro was excellent. There was a inner ring, so you could get around the inner city, and then lines that went out to the suburbs, and it was very reliable. You had to know that Sledisha Station, next station, otherwise you would miss your station, but other than that. And some of the stations were really palatial, and this was, it goes back to, I guess, to the communists in the 1930s that wanted to build these as show places. So this is Gomolovskaya Station, which was kind of a youth organization in the Soviet Union, I think. Well, this is a sinister presence, the Lubyanka building. Of course, what you really feel when you're in Russia for any period of time is that, the presence of the now called the Federal Security Service, FSB, but in Tsarist times it was the Okhrana that spied on everybody, and then of course with the Soviets, the Cheka, and then eventually the KGB that you're familiar with. You really feel that you're being watched. I didn't care if people looked at my papers and so forth because I wanted them to, because that was, they could read all my, they could read my laptop and everything in it as far as I was concerned. So some of the buildings are quite beautiful, I think, and this convent and cemetery was one of them. It's a place where eminent people are buried, but not eminent enough for the Kremlin wall. So Chekhov, Gogol, Boris Yeltsin are buried here. It's another example of unusual architecture. I guess they call them helmet domes as opposed to tulip domes. Again, we don't know the genesis of the architecture. One of the enterprising Americans started a diner. It's like a silver diner model. They called it the Starlight Diner, and it looked like a spaceship that landed in Pushkin Square because Pushkin Square is surrounded by Stalinist architecture. This was a real American presence, so if you wanted to get a club sandwich or a burger or something like that, you could go here, and there were always Americans there, so it was kind of a fun escape from the grimness of a Russian winter. One of the things I did there, though, was teach American business law to Russian lawyers. There was a woman from San Diego State who had started a law school, Pericles Law School, still there. She's married to a Russian, who asked me to teach a course in business law. So I did that, and it was a lot of fun, and I got to meet people who were not Russians who were not involved with our project. One of the interesting places in Moscow is Ismailovsky Market, which is a huge open-air market where you can buy anything. You can buy Soviet passports, military garb, Matryoshka dolls, and actually I bought a couple of very nice watercolors there, which I still have. But you could, it was a really interesting place. This is a little chapel near Russian Customs headquarters, and Russia has several official religions, but non-official religions under Putin are not tolerated. So even though the Mormon Church tried to make converts in Russia, they were eventually had to leave. The Cathedral of Christ the Savior actually was destroyed by Stalin, and he built a swimming pool where it was located, and then as soon as communism fell, they decided they would recreate the church. So this is a church built to the plan of the original church and opened in 1997. And here I am at Easter services at Christ the Savior, Russian Easter, which of course is different from our Easter in the West because they're using a different calendar. The American Chamber of Commerce in Russia was a real presence because there are many American businesses at the time, including Ford and McDonald's and large consulting firms and so forth. And it was also a place where I did a lot of work, consulting with businesses in terms of the work that we were doing. I was there for the 60th anniversary of the end of the Great Patriotic War, the World War II, May 9th, 1945, what we consider to be VE Day. And here's the parade in commemoration, and some Cossacks actually riding in the parade. Culture and music in Russia are great, and in that sense they're like the French. They think they're among the most cultured people in the world. They go to the theater, the concerts, what have you. And I was able in June of 2005 to go to Bolshoi. It was actually about to be closed for renovation, and watched. They want to develop the economy, but with the exception of the energy sector, that's not going too well. They want to reestablish control over the former Soviet countries like Ukraine, and counter, of course, U.S. and Western European political influence while becoming modern, and reestablish Russia as a global superpower. And I guess our objectives regarding Russia are to be determined. So this is a very quick summary of my very interesting and actually I felt at the time rewarding experience in Russia. I know that things don't look good now in terms of Russian participation in the international economy, but I think seeds have been planted and may germinate in the future. At least that's my hope. Hopefully not in a not too distant future. So thanks a lot. I hope if you have questions, comments, this is the time. Kev?
I have a question. When you showed the roof domes in the Kremlin and whatnot, you referred to them as tulip domes, and I always heard of them as onion domes.
Yeah, either, yes. You could. I've heard both terms. Yeah.
And when
But actually, Kathleen and I were investigating, and we were not able to. My thought always had been that there was some antecedent in maybe the Middle East or even in Western Asia, but we couldn't find anything. So it seems to be unique. Maybe Mike has better information.
My understanding is that it came from the Byzantine Empire. When the Byzantine Empire fell, what was that, around 1000, 1100, something like that?
Yeah.
That a lot of the cultural influences moved up through the Rus. But I don't even remember where I knew that, but that's where I heard it.
Yeah, we looked at that, but it didn't seem to be that clear. If you look at the architecture like Santa Sofia in Istanbul, it's nothing like this Russian architecture. So we didn't come to a conclusion about that. Let's see. Okay, all the way in the back.
Question: how did your project turn out? I have friends who work for Bearing Point, and they said nothing. They went through the process, went through the motions, but nothing really changed.
Well, we felt it turned out successfully. The Russian partners felt it was successful. They didn't immediately join the World Trade Organization or the Revised Kyoto Convention. That didn't happen for another 6 years, I guess. But ultimately, they did, and it was a process of, as far as World Trade Organization agreements, it was a process not just of the customs-related agreements, but there were other agreements too that they had to conform their domestic legislation to. So we felt, the Russians felt, and our other partners felt that what we did and our discrete project was successful. Yes, sir.
What was your language for the program? Russian or?
We actually translating things from English into Russian was a little bit of a problem because of the technical terms. And we went through a number of different translators before we found somebody who was really acceptable as far as the Russians were concerned to, because you're translating documents that are, the World Trade Organization has several official languages, but Russian is not one of them. So it was a matter of generally translating documents from English into Russian.
Did you
Jim?
have any interaction at all with private sector businesses, and if so, how did that go? What
Well,
did they have?
because I was working with at least the American businesses, the American Russian Chamber of Commerce. So we were, very interested in the perspective of American businesses like Ford, for example, doing business in Russian Federation and what their concerns were, and how that might affect, the work that we were doing.
So,
And of course, as I indicated, I also had contact with local American entrepreneurs, who, like the guy who was doing the apartment business, that I was running my apartment from, or the Starlight Diner and that sort of thing. There were American artists there. There were small business people there. There were it was sort of like maybe in a sense, the American West, and there were people who wanted to get in on a new thing at that time, and I thought that Russia would be a new frontier. But you could always feel particularly me in my role, could always feel the kind of the weight of the security state. The Felix Dzerzhinsky, I think, was the famous founder of the Cheka KGB. You could feel, but it was just a continuation from Tsarist times. Everyone was under surveillance, and they were always suspicious of you, that you were really a spy, because they would have been, in a reverse situation, they would have been a spy. So it's not a pleasant place to work. Yes, ma'am.
What was the menu at the Silver Diner like?
It was